Hello, my name is Kevin Faust, Technical Coordinator for Bendix Commercial Vehicle Systems. In this video, we're going to discuss the corrective actions for the Knorr-Bremse SB7 air disc brake recall. The official notification of this recall is available on the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's website. This video will outline the following: how to identify affected buses, removal of the wheels, brake chambers, electrical wear sensors, brake pads, and caliper assemblies, installation of replacement components, reassembly of the rebushed Knorr brake caliper, brake chamber, brake pads and wheels, deacceleration test, and who to contact and how to gather more information. You will receive the special replacement guide pin kit. The part number is K170658. The part number for the toolkit required to perform this service are K039062K50 and Z001105. Contact your ZF service representative if your location does not have the required tools. In order to verify a claim, you will need to submit the information here. Information regarding the identification of affected buses will be provided by ZF or the OEM. Next, we need to be sure to identify the Knorr SB7 caliper. Begin by jacking up the vehicle according to the vehicle OEM service instructions. Locate the axle serial plate according to the diagram shown. Identify both the axle serial number and the parts list number as shown on the ID plate. Next, we will verify the affected Knorr brake caliper based on production number. The brakes that may be affected are 22.5-inch radial disc brakes SB7, manufactured between January 1, 2015 and January 16 of 2017. Once it has been determined that the vehicle is affected by the recall, begin the disassembly process. First, we begin with the removal of the brake chambers. Second, disconnect any wear sensing, wiring, and connectors. Next, remove the air disc brake pads from the caliper. Lastly, we will remove the brake assembly from the vehicle. It will be necessary to separate the caliper from the carrier. It is possible to do this operation either on or off the vehicle, depending upon suspension geometry. It may be easier to separate the caliper from the carrier on the vehicle, leaving the carrier installed. Both methods are correct. However, depending on the vehicle, it may be significantly easier to do one or the other. If you wish to remove the caliper and carrier as an assembly, remove the 6 bolts between the carrier and the axle flange. If you wish to separate the caliper from the carrier and the vehicle, leave the bolts between the carrier and the axle flange in place, and proceed with the instructions to separate the caliper from the carrier. The next step is to remove the caliper from the carrier. The only action that are covered under the recall is the servicing of the guide pin bushings. Any additional maintenance service to be performed will not be covered under the recall. To separate the caliper from the carrier, you need to first remove the guide pin cap and bolt from the large fixed guide pin. Then you need to remove the bolt from the short floating guide pin. Remove the caliper, install it into a vise to begin the procedure of replacing the guide pin bushings. To remove the large fixed guide pin bushing, the first thing we need to do is remove the boot. To remove the boot, you need to take a screwdriver, flat-bladed screwdriver, reach up in there and pry down on the boot, taking care not to damage the bore. Now that we've removed the boot, we'll go ahead and discard that. We'll take our bushing press tool and we'll install that. Set that on top, take your bushing press, thread it together. You thread it together until you got a good snug fit. Take a wrench, start to remove your bushing. Once you've finished removing the large pin bushing, remove the tool, thread your tool back out. When we're done removing this, we'll go over to the floating pin and remove the bushing from that side also. Our next step is to remove the floating pin bushing. Installing the proper tool, tighten it up by hand, take a 15/16 wrench, tighten it down, and start to remove your bushing. Once you've went ahead and pulled the bushing out of the bore, the next thing you need to do is inspect the bores for any damage. If there is damage, you need to replace the caliper. If there's no damage, we'll go ahead and go to the next step of pressing the bushings back in. The next step we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and reinstall all the bushings. We're going to start on the large fixed pin bushing first. We're going to take the bushing and the staking tool. We're going to engage the bushing onto the tool. We're going to take the tool and insert it from the bottom. Once we get the tool bushing and lined up into the bore, we're going to take the top part of the tool, the threaded tube, and we're going to screw it all together. Once we screw it down tight, we make sure it's snug by hand with a pressing tool against the caliper housing. We're going to go ahead and take a 15/16 wrench and we're going to start to press the bushing in. All right, you'll know that the bushing is seated when 1 millimeter is showing in this area here by the staking tool. Now that we've determined that the bushing is properly seated, we'll need to go ahead and stake the bushing internally. We adjust the screw out until we get snug, and then we take a wrench and we twist the adjusting screw until we stake the bushing. Once you've staked the bushing, you'll stop, and then you'll back the staking tool back off. At this point now, we need to loosen the tool up and rotate it to do a 90-degree stake. After staking the bushing for the first time, we're going to loosen the tool up, rotate the staking tool 90 degrees, tighten down the tool again so that the staking tool is snug. We'll go ahead and restake the bushing again with a wrench. Once the tool is staked, you back the staking tool off and then remove the tool from the bushing. Now that we've installed the bushing and staked it, now we're going to install the boot. Be careful installing the boot into the fixture not to damage the boot pushing it in and tearing it. Best way to do is stick the boot in and take your finger and press it around until you draw on the boot into the fixture. Once you get the boot all the way into the fixture, the seal ring will be against the fixture. Take your fixture, put it underneath, take your tool, engage the tool into your pressing fixture. Screw your pressing fixture down until it's snug. To install the rubber boot, you need to tighten it down to 8 Newton meters. Once you reach the 8 Newton meters, the boot will be seated properly. You can see where we went ahead and installed the boot on the large pin side. On the short pin side, we're going to install the boot. We have 2 different collars. All right, so we have a 35 millimeter and a 39 millimeter. The 35 millimeter you don't need, you can throw that away. 39 millimeter, when you pull it out, you have a wiper ring that you will install. Once the wiper ring is installed completely, then you have your boot. You'll snap your boot in to the wiper ring and cap. Now we're ready to install our short bushing. To install our short bushing, you'll need to make sure that when you slide the bushing up into the pressing tool, that it makes contact to the steel sleeve. Install your tool into the bore. With the tool in the bore, you take your next bottom pressing sleeve, and you can see there's a little Allen screw. Make sure that that Allen screw is flush to the tool. Lift your threaded rod up, install your tool. Once you install your tool, take your brass pressing sleeve on the bottom and snug them up until the tool is snug to the caliper housing. Once it's snug to the caliper housing, take your wrench and start compressing the bushing down into the bore. Pressing the bushing in, adjust the tool up until it stops. Once the tool stops, go ahead and back your tool back off. Remove the pressing sleeves and your bushing will be seated to the proper depth. We now are going to install the guide pins. We'll lube the bushings from the back side on the fixed guide pin. Once we've done that, we'll install the guide pin from the back and insert it through the boot until it engages into the groove. Installing the white disc, make sure that that the air is all out of the boot. Now we're going to go ahead and go to the short pin side, making sure that we lube the short pin bushing from the inside and then installing the pin from the inside. Once all parts have been properly replaced, we can proceed to the reassembly sequence. Note, this is a good time to inspect the caliper for any additional maintenance. However, any additional maintenance that is required is not covered under the terms of this recall. Place completed rebushed Knorr caliper assembly onto the hub carrier. Next, we will reinstall the brake chamber to the brake caliper. Install the brake chamber as follows. Next, reinstall the air disc brake pads. Reattach the wheels according to the OEM manufacturer service manual. Finally, it is recommended to conduct the following deceleration tests to verify proper function of the brake assembly. For any further questions, please contact ZF through one of the following outlets.